The fog clung to the forest like a slow, deliberate breath. Each step I took on the damp earth seemed louder than the last, though the trees pressed in close, muffling the distant world. Pale light from my lantern barely touched the twisted roots and jagged rocks ahead, and I could feel the shadows moving just beyond the edge of vision. Somewhere deep in the woods, a low hum vibrated through the silence, almost as if the trees themselves were whispering secrets. I thought I was alone with nothing but the crunch of leaves beneath my boots, but the air felt heavier, expectant. Every rustle made me pause. Every flicker of light felt like a warning. I could see an old cabin in the distance, hidden among the fog, its windows like dark, watching eyes. There was a pull, a quiet insistence that I come closer, though a small voice in my mind whispered not to. But curiosity always wins, doesn't it? I approached, the wooden steps creaking under my weight, and I could swear I felt something alive. Inside, waiting. That's when I saw it. The fog hung low over the forest. It smelled damp, like wet earth and decaying leaves. I could barely see my hands in front of me. A faint glow flickered ahead. A lantern, pale, unsteady. It hovered among the twisted trees, as if it belonged there. I followed. Soft footsteps on moss and fallen pine. The air was cold. My breath came out in slow, misty clouds. The light moved, though, not like a lantern on a path. It darted, hesitated, then floated again. Shadows shifted at the edges of my vision. Branches groaned. Leaves whispered. I tried to blink away, tried to convince myself it was just the fog. But the lantern, it moved for me, led me deeper, through paths I didn't recognize, paths I didn't remember. A hum began, low, vibrating through my chest. I stopped, tilted my head. It came from everywhere, and nowhere. The trees pressed closer, their bark rough against my palms as I brushed past. A scent of damp moss and something older, metallic, hung in the air. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to run. But the lantern waited, bobbing in the mist like a heartbeat. It flickered again. And the shadows, they weren't shadows. They twitched, stretched, curling toward me. I felt them on my skin. Cold fingers brushing my arms, my neck. I walked on. The fog thickened. My legs ached. Every step felt like sinking. The hum grew louder, sharper. It wound around my thoughts, my pulse. I tried to follow its rhythm. The lantern drifted sideways, always just out of reach. The trees seemed to whisper, now, soft, sibilant sounds. I could not tell if they were words or echoes of my own fear. Branches scraped against my face. The lantern swayed closer, and in its pale light, I thought I saw someone or something in the shadows. I blinked. Nothing. Just fog. Just the lantern. Just me. But the humming, it didn't stop. It threaded through the fog, through the trees, through my own chest. I felt in my teeth, in my bones. The path twisted again. Every direction looked the same. I reached out. The lantern drifted just beyond my fingertips. I wanted to touch it. I wanted to follow it forever. A rustling behind me. Small. Insistent. I froze. My breath caught. The lantern flickered, and I swear it pulsed, as if alive. I walked faster. The fog clung to my skin, wet and cold. The humming swelled. My vision swam. Something pressed close. Something that should not exist pressed close. The lantern stopped, hanging midair, silent. The hum vanished. And in the stillness, I realized I was utterly, completely alone. Or maybe not. A shadow shifted just beyond the light. It mirrored me. Its movements were mine, but wrong. The lantern bobbed once, then vanished, and the fog swallowed me whole. I stopped. My legs refused to move. The hum returned, faint now, soft, insistent, and I understood something terrible. I could not leave. I was not leading the lantern. It was leading me. I sank to ground, shivering. The fog thickened. The shadows lingered. And the hum hummed forever. The pines stretched tall above me. Their needles whispered with the wind, brushing my face and arms like soft, cold fingers. The forest smelled sharp and resinous, damp from recent rain. A path opened before me. though I had never seen it. Forgotten, overgrown, lined with fallen needles that muffled my steps. The air felt heavy, as if it were waiting. I followed the trail slowly. Every footstep pressed into the soft earth. Leaves shivered, even when the wind didn't move. Whispers drifted around me. Soft, urgent. I couldn't understand them, but they felt alive. A branch scraped my shoulder. I jumped, heart quickening. Nothing was there, only pines, swaying gently, their shadows stretching like long fingers across the ground. The whispers grew, layered, echoing. I tilted my head. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, and nowhere at all. A sudden rustle. Something passed close, brushing against my coat. I froze, my breath held tight in my chest. It felt too light, too deliberate. The needles above rattled, falling like rain. They brushed my skin, cold, damp, and beneath them, half buried, something glinted. I knelt, fingers brushing away wet needles and dirt. An old trinket lay there, small, metal, faded. It smelled faintly of iron and earth. Its edges were worn smooth, as if held by many hands before me. I turned it over my palm. A shiver ran down my spine. The whispers circled again, closer. The air thickened, heavy with something unspoken. The pines seemed to lean in, watching, waiting. A soft wind rustled through the branches. It carried with it a metallic tang, a memory I couldn't name. The shadows shifted at the corners of my vision, curling, retreating, then flicking back. I stood slowly, clutching the trinket. The trail behind me had disappeared. Only the whispering pines remained. Silent, yet vibrating with the low hum of something ancient. I stepped forward. Needles crushed underfoot. The whispers followed, winding through the air. I felt them pressing against my skin, curling around my neck, whispering my name softly. The forest thickened. Fog settled at the bases of the trees, soft and wet. I brushed my palms along the rough bark as I walked. Every touch left a cold imprint, like the tree remembered me. Leaves fell again, swirling unnaturally. They spun in circles, tracing patterns I didn't recognize. I caught glimpses of shapes in the shadows, elongated, shifting, familiar, yet wrong. The trinket felt heavier in my hand, cold and alive, as if it held its own heartbeat. The whispers softened, a low but not a comfort. Something lingered just beyond the fog. I paused, closed my eyes. The smell of wet pine and old metal filled my nose. The hum of the forest, the breath of the wind, the whisper of the needles, all of it pressed into me, soft, insistent, and uneasy. I wanted to leave. I wanted the trail to lead somewhere known. But it had vanished, leaving only the pines, the fog, the trinket. I walked on, each step careful, measured, as if not to wake the forest. The whispers followed, fading only when I stopped. The feeling remained, that I was being watched, by something patient, by something that waited in silence. The trinket burned faintly in my hand. The shadows held still, and the pines whispered on, alone with the wind, the needles, and the memory of something I could not yet name. The forest was quiet, colder now. Fog curled around the trunks of the trees, soft and thick. The ground smelled of damp leaves and something older, hidden beneath the soil. I stepped forward. Crunch. Leaves broke underfoot. A faint echo followed. I paused, held my breath. Another crunch answered mine, but no one was there. Shadows twisted between the pines. Long, thin, impossible to name. They flickered just beyond sight, shifting when I tried to focus. I walked faster. The echo followed. Each footstep mirrored perfectly, exactly. The wind whispered through the branches. Needles brushed my face, cold and wet. The echo, it didn't sway with the wind. It stayed precise. I turned a corner. The fog swallowed the path. A silhouette flashed, pale and fleeting, gone before my eyes could fully catch it. My pulse quickened. The forest held its breath. Static hung in the air, heavy, sticky. Every step I took, another answer behind me. Soft, deliberate, but invisible. I could feel it pressing close, breathing in rhythm with my own. Branches scraped across my shoulders. The smell of wet pine and cold earth filled my nose. The fog thickened, pressing against my skin like damp cloth. The shadows stretched, reaching, twisting with intent. I stopped. The footsteps didn't. They circled, distant yet exact. Every turn I took, they matched. A faint hum, low and thread-like, drifted through the fog. I tilted my head, straining to locate it, but it moved with me, always just out of reach. Leaves fell unnaturally around me, twisting midair, brushing my cheeks, landing on my shoulders, and the silhouette returned for a heartbeat. Pale, silent, vanished before I could speak. I tried to call out. My voice was swallowed instantly. Only my own breath answered, ragged, warm against the cold mist. The fog shifted. It formed shapes that lingered just beyond recognition. Branches curved in impossible angles. Shadows that were not shadows moved with subtle purpose. I walked again, careful, measured. The footsteps followed, precise, tireless. They echoed my fears, synchronized with my pulse. The air grew heavier, charged with the unspoken. Each inhalation was thick, each exhale tight. The forest seemed alive, leaning closer, waiting for me to falter. Another turn, another fleeting shape. Gone, gone, gone. I slowed, held my hand against the rough bark of a tree. It was cold, damp, solid, comforting, almost, but the footsteps, they never slowed. The fog pressed in. The silhouettes danced at the edge of perception. The forest whispered in low, insistent tones. I was not alone, and yet nothing visible remained. Every sound, every movement, every breath answered perfectly, mirrored perfectly. By something I could not see, could not name, I stopped completely. The footsteps paused just behind me. I could feel their presence, waiting for me to move. The fog swirled. Shadows hovered. Silence deepened, unnatural, thick, and I was left with only the echo of myself and the certainty that I was being followed. The fog thinned slightly, revealing shapes among the trees. A cabin emerged, crumbling and silent, except for the hum that seeped through the air. It was gray, splintered, rotting. The roof sagged. The door hung slightly ajar. I stepped closer, branches scratching my arms. The smell of wet pine and decay wrapped around me. The hum inside pulsed softly, low and steady. It threaded through the boards, vibrating beneath my fingers as I touched the frame. Cold seeped into my skin, deeper than the chill of the air. I paused. The forest behind me was quiet, almost too quiet. Leaves lay still. Fog coiled between the trunks like smoke. The door moved slightly, swinging on rusted hinges. A breath of cold air brushed my face, sharp and sudden. It carried the scent of mold, old wood, and something faintly metallic. I crouched, listening. The hum pulsed again, stronger, resonant. It wasn't music, not voice, not machine, just a vibration that threaded into my chest and lingered there. The shadows inside shifted. They didn't belong to the trees. They moved of their own accord, curling to corners, twisting across the floor. I could feel the boards beneath my fingertips. Cold, splintered, fragile. The hum threaded into the wood. Into me. I pressed my ear to the door. The vibration deepened. I thought I could hear something faint, almost a whisper, but it dissolved into silence before I could recognize it. The fog wrapped around the cabin. Branches tapped against the walls. I stepped back instinctively, breath foggy in front of me. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my feet remained. The air shifted. A breeze flowed from the doorway, brushing my neck, my hair. It was colder than the fog, colder than the night. It carried the smell of something forgotten, old. I crouched slightly, fingers curling around the edge of the doorframe. The wood gave slightly under my touch, groaning. The hum pulsed again, rhythmic, steady, alive. I could see the interior now, dark, gray, and empty, or so it seemed. The shadows moved independently, curling over each other in unnatural patterns. Pale light slipped through cracks in the wall, thin as breath. I swallowed. The trinket in my pocket felt heavier, pressing against my palm. The forest waited behind me, still and silent. The hum called from within. I debated. Step inside. Step back. The wind pressed against my skin. The smell of damp would fill my lungs. I reached out. Fingers hovered over the threshold. The shadows shifted again. The hum pulsed once more, insistent, patient. I froze. The door swayed slightly. The air tightened, pressing close, cold and unyielding. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in rhythm with the hum. And then, nothing. The forest held its breath. The cabin waited. And I hesitated. The cabin loomed in the fog. Faint light flickered through the cracks of its weather walls. Thin beams danced across the damp earth, pale and unsteady. I stepped closer. The smell of wet wood, ash, and something older, lingering in the corners, filled my lungs. Branches scraped my coat. The air was cold against my skin. Shapes moved behind the windows. Shifting shadows, blurred and uncertain. I squinted, tried to make sense of them. They were almost human, almost familiar. A soft creak came from the boards beneath my hand. I pressed my palm to the wall. Cold, splintered, fragile. The flickering light reflected off the damp surface. The wind carried whispers. Or maybe it was the house itself, sighing. A thin, metallic tang lingered in my nose. The forest waited silently behind me. Something scratched inside. Soft, deliberate, behind the wall. A pattern, slow, methodical. I pressed my ear to the cracks. The scratching paused, then moved again, almost beneath my skin. It echoed, soft, constant, like fingernails brushing against dry timber. I knelt, fingers tracing the outlines of the boards. The light flickered again. Shapes shifted inside, too quick to follow, but too deliberate to ignore. The fog curled around my boots. My breath fog in front of me. Every inhale heavy with the scent of wet pine, damp earth, and ash. A shadow passed the window, slender, elongated. It moved with a slow, undulating rhythm. Not like a person, not quite. I felt the vibration of the house beneath my hands. The hum of it, or was it me? It pulsed through the floorboards, up my arms, settling in my chest. The air grew colder. A breeze slipped through a crack, brushing my cheek, sending goosebumps across my arms. The scratching continued, faint but steady. I pressed closer. The shapes inside swirled, shifting in the faint flicker of pale light. Some moved toward the cracks. Some retreated. I could see the texture of the boards now. Old, warped, soaked from years of rain. The smell of charred wood lingered faintly, like a fire long gone. I crouched lower, closer to the crack. Curiosity pressed forward stronger than fear. The scratching grew louder for a moment, then softened again, like a secret being drawn in. The shadows pulsed with a flicker. They weren't still. They weren't absent. They were waiting, shifting, watching, and I couldn't look away. The fog outside thickened. Branches tapped against the walls. The faint light danced in and out of cracks. A pulse of heat, or was it breath? Brushed my hand against the boards. I stepped back slightly, unsettled, but the curiosity lingered, heavier than my caution. The scratching, the shadows, the flicker, it called to me. I stayed there a moment longer. Hands cold, knees damp against the earth. The cabin waited. The fog waited. And I waited. Curiosity, soft and insistent, wrapped around me like the chill in the air. I stepped inside. The door groaned, warped on its hinges. The smell of damp wood, an old ash wrapped around me. Pale light filtered through cracks, painting the floor in jagged shapes. Shadows danced across the warped boards, moving like they had their own life. I felt the chill of the air against my skin, damp and heavy. The door slammed behind me. The echo rattled softly through the walls. A pulse of fear traveled up my spine. The hum I had felt outside seemed muted here. But something else had taken its place. A presence, watching, patient. The floor creaked beneath my feet. I stepped slowly, fingertips brushing the rough boards. Each step made the shadows flicker and twist. I reached for the wall. Cold wood, splintered, wet with age. The fog I had left behind lingered in the corners, curling around my ankles. A dusty mirror hung crookedly. its surface clouded, streaked with age and neglect. I glanced into it. For a heartbeat, a reflection stared back. Not mine, not fully. A fleeting shape, blurred at the edges, vanished before I could focus. The room felt smaller suddenly. The shadows shifted closer, stretching across the floor like slow tendrils. I could sense them pressing in, watching, silent. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of mold and old fire. My breath came out in misty clouds, quick and shallow. Every sound, my heartbeat, the floorboards, the faint wind through the cracks, echoed unnaturally. I moved forward. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision. They didn't behave like normal darkness. They paused, twisted as if observing me. A floorboard groaned under my weight. The reflection in the mirror shifted again. A pulse of movement. Too fast, too deliberate. Gone. I pressed a hand to my chest. The feeling of being watched pressed in deeper. Eyes I could not see traced every motion, every shallow breath. The room breathed with me. The shadows stretched and shrank with the flickering light. The silence pulsed between them and me. I took a careful step backward. The door stayed closed. The mirror's surface remained clouded, waiting. The shadows lingered, restless, patient. I stood still. The room held me, still and heavy. Unease pressed against my bones. I could not shake it. The pale light shifted. Shadows curled. The mirror's reflection remained empty or perhaps waiting. And I stayed, listening, breathing, alone. A table sat in the center of the room. Dust covered it, thick and soft. On it rested a journal, edges frayed, leather cracked. I reached for it. The leather felt cold under my fingers. A faint scent of old paper, smoke, and something metallic rose with it. I opened the journal. The pages whispered faintly as they moved. Words scratched in ink that faded to brown. The entries, figures. Strange, elongated shapes moving in the fog. Events that made no sense. Unexplained. Every line carried a weight, a hint of dread I could feel in my chest. I read again. The words shifted. Sentences rearranged themselves subtly. Moments I hadn't seen before appeared. Moments that felt like warnings. A draft moved through the room. The pages fluttered in response. I could hear the soft scrape of ink across paper, though no pen moved. I leaned closer. The smell of damp wood, ash, and old smoke clung to the air. The shadows in the room stretched toward the journal, curling softly against the floorboards. A whisper, my name, soft, insistent, drawn from the corners of the room. Not the wind, not the hum, something alive. I froze. The journal felt heavier in my hands. The words shifted again, twisting, elongating, like the shapes I had seen outside the cabin beyond the fog. The room breathed with me, or maybe I breathed with it. The candlelight, faint and flickering, reflected in the dusty mirror. A shadow flitted across it, too quick, too deliberate. The pages told stories I could almost remember, figures at the edge of vision, steps that weren't mine, eyes in the darkness, watching, waiting. I read further. The entries became personal. A sentence here, a phrase there, hints that the journal knew me, or had always known me. The whisper returned, softer now, closer. It threaded into the rhythm of my heartbeat. I traced the words with a trembling finger. Ink blurred beneath my touch. Some passages disappeared, replaced with new ones. I could not stop reading. The air thickened. Cold pressed against my face. The floorboards moaned beneath my weight. Shadows pressed closer, leaning over the journal, watching, patient. A draft brushed my hair. The smell of smoke and earth filled my nostrils. The room felt alive, waiting, expecting. I could hear faint footsteps. Or was it only my pulse echoing? The whisper hummed in time with my breath. The journal seemed to pulse in my hands, warm and heavy. The candlelight flickered again. Shapes moved in the corners of my eyes. They were not solid, not absent, but they watched. I swallowed. The pages shifted once more. A final sentence appeared. A question. I felt drawn, compelled, curious beyond caution. The whisper lingered, soft, waiting, and I could not look away. The hallway ended at a door, old and warped. The air beyond it pulsed faintly. A hum, low and steady, vibrated through the floorboards. I stepped closer. The air brushed my skin, soft as breath, almost alive. It carried the scent of damp wood, dust, and something I could not name. The door's surface was cold under my palm. The hum deepened, threading through my chest, through my fingertips. Shadows flickered along the edges of the walls. I pressed my ear to the door. The vibration moved through it, subtle, deliberate. The hum was not just sound. It seemed to breathe with me. A draft curled around my ankles. The floorboards whispered beneath my weight. The shadows in the corner twisted, stretching, retreating, then flicking back. I reached for the handle. Cold, rough, unyielding. The hum pulsed stronger. It resonated in my teeth, my bones, and in the very air I inhaled. The room beyond remained hidden. I could sense its presence, a waiting, something shifting just behind the closed door. I took a step back. The vibration lingered, brushing along my neck and shoulders. The shadows along the hallway stretched toward me, thin, curling, alive. The hum changed, threaded now with whispers I could not parse. Soft syllables, urgent but fleeting. I tried to listen, tried to locate the source. A flicker of movement behind the door, too quick to see clearly, too deliberate to ignore. I felt eyes, something aware, watching through the wall. The air thickened. Each breath was heavy with dust and faint smoke. My fingertips tingled from the cold that seemed to seep from the very boards. I stepped closer again. The shadows twisted, following. The hum threaded through the floorboards, through the door, through me. I could feel in my pulse, in my chest, in the backs of my knees. A sudden silence fell for a heartbeat. Then the hum returned, stronger, insistent. It wrapped around me, tethering me to the threshold. I pressed my hand to the door once more. The vibration hummed beneath my palm. Something breathed on the other side. Slow, waiting, patient. The shadows curled around the edges of my vision. The air quivered like something unseen shifted within it. A metallic tang filled my nose. The room waited beyond the door. I could hear soft, almost imperceptible creaks behind the walls. Small, deliberate, pausing when I paused, moving when I moved. The hum seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. The shadows pressed closer, and I could not step away. The door remained closed. The vibration lingered. The hum threaded through the hallway and into me, and something behind the wood waited. I stood there still, listening, breathing, alone. Anxiety curled softly around my chest, and I knew, with every nerve, that the room was aware of me, and that it had always been waiting. The room was darker than before. Shadows pulled in the corners. The air was thick, carrying the smell of damp wood and old smoke. Tiny glimmers appeared in the darkness, faint, like distant stars trapped in a room. They flickered, then disappeared, then returned. I stepped forward. Each movement made the shadows shift. They didn't just move, they mimicked me exactly. Every sway, every tilt, every slow breath reflected perfectly. A cold draft brushed my face. The glimmers darted. I could feel the floorboards beneath my feet, creaking softly, wet from the chill. The shadows stretched across the walls. They twisted unnaturally, curling at the edges. It felt as if they were breathing, watching, learning. I reached out. The darkness seemed to pulse beneath my fingertips. The faint glimmers watched too, flickering with a rhythm that wasn't mine. A soft rustle came from behind. Something moved closer, and then a hand, cold and impossibly thin, rested on my shoulder. I froze. The shadows jerked in response. The glimmers blinked in unison, reflecting the panic that rippled through me. The room pressing around me. The air hummed faintly, vibrating through my chest. I could feel it in my teeth, in my spine, in the soles of my feet. The hand remained, light as mist, cold as ice. It didn't grip. It only rested. Patient, insistent. I turned slightly. The glimmers shifted. Shadows twisted again, perfectly mirroring my movements. It was impossible to look away. The floor creaked beneath me. I could hear my own heartbeat, but it was layered with another pulse. Slow, watching, The glimmers flickered closer, clustering in the corners. Eyes. Tiny eyes. Watching. Not human. Not fully. I swallowed. The hand tightened just a fraction. Cold seeping through my skin, chilling my bones. The shadows leaned. The room seemed to breathe with them. The glimmers blinked in time with the pulse. And I realized every movement I made, every breath I took, every heartbeat was mirrored by something alive. The hand lifted, brushing along my shoulder blade. I could feel the cold trailing down my spine. A soft static filled the silence, vibrating in my ears. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee, but my body remained rooted. The shadows stretched, glimmers flickering. The presence behind me remained, watching, waiting, and I understood with a sudden cold clarity. I was not alone. I had never been alone. And the darkness had eyes. The room was still, air thick and damp. Fog clung to the corners, curling around the floorboards. The window creaked, slowly, by itself. A chill drifted in with the fog. It brushed my arms, my face soft and wet. The smell of damp earth, smoke, and something faintly sweet carried in on it. I stepped closer. The glass trembled as the fog pressed against it. Outside, shapes were muted, distorted, like the world had folded in on itself. I could hear laughter, soft, faint, threaded through the fog, almost playful, almost distant, but not entirely. A handprint appeared on the glass, pale, damp, smudged along the surface. Not my own. I pressed my palm to the cold wood of the window frame. The fog pressed closer, curling around my fingers, dripping down my arms. The laughter shifted, closer, teasing, impossible to locate. The world beyond the window felt unreal, twisted, slow, shimmering through the fog like a reflection in water. I tilted my head, trying to understand, trying to ground myself. The handprint pulsed faintly, like it had a warmth I could feel through the glass. A soft static lingered in the air, brushing the hairs on my arms. I stepped back. The fog spilled further into the room, filling the corners, curling around my ankles. The laughter faded, leaving a silence that pressed against my ears. Shadows stretched along the floor. They reached toward the window, twisting with the movement of the fog. The handprint remained, watching, waiting. I breathed slowly, tried to steady myself. The air was cold, thick with damp, yet somehow alive, pulsing softly with each heartbeat. The fog swirled. It carried whispers, faint and threaded. Shapes moved beyond the glass, just at the edge of sight. The world outside was there and not there. I pressed a fingertip against the glass. The handprint was smooth, impossibly cold. It lingered under my touch. The laughter whispered again, teasing, distant yet near. I wanted to close the window. The wood felt slick, damp under my hands. The glass seemed to resist, holding its secrets in the fog. The room held its breath with me. The shadows moved closer, stretching across the warped floorboards. The handprint pulsed faintly, and I could not tear my eyes away. Outside, the fog shifted. The distorted world shimmered. Shapes leaned just beyond perception, waiting. The laughter faded completely. Only the handprint remained. And the uneasy feeling that I had crossed a threshold I could not see. I stepped back, alone, cold, watching, and the window waited. The room was still, thick with dust and the scent of damp wood. Every breath I drew felt heavy, carried with it the chill of the cabin. The fog outside pressed against the windows, pale and restless. Then it began. A groan from above. The ceiling board shifted, warped under a weight that shouldn't be there. I froze. The air thickened around me. Each breath came cold, carrying a faint metallic tang. A footstep. Another. Then a pause. Then more impossible, uneven, as if rhythm itself had broken. Shadows stretched along the walls. They quivered with each creak, reaching, curling, almost alive. I pressed my hands to my chest, feeling the pulse of the floorboards beneath my feet. A flash of light, bright, sudden, then gone. The darkness returned, heavy and whispering, pressing against my senses. I tilted my head, trying to locate it. The shadows lingered. The ceiling groaned again, slowly, deliberately. Echoes bounced in impossible patterns, filling the room with uneven rhythm. The air grew colder. Each inhale drew frost into my lungs. My fingertips tingled. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I stepped forward cautiously. Every movement triggered a corresponding creak above, faster than the last. It was like the floorboards themselves were alive, mimicking, learning. The shadows shifted closer. The flash of light returned, pale, flickering, just for a heartbeat, then gone. A presence lingered in its absence. I could feel it, watching, waiting. The rhythm of its steps seemed to measure my own heartbeat. The floorboards groaned under me as if in response. The air pressed closer, heavy with cold and dust. Static prickled across my skin, faint, insistent. I held my breath. The groaning above continued, slow, uneven, mocking. The shadows writhed softly across the warped floorboards. Another flash, closer this time. I could feel warmth where it had briefly touched the edges of the room. Then it vanished, leaving ice in its place. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. The air hung heavy, trembling, vibrating with anticipation. I pressed a hand to the wall. The wood was cold, slick with condensation. The silence that followed was louder than the steps themselves. And still, the chill remained. The shadows lingered. The room felt alive, watching, breathing in sync with the ceiling above. I couldn't move. Every nerve whispered to flee. But I stayed, alone, listening, waiting. The groan returned, slow, deliberate, above me, and the cold, it wrapped around my chest, pressing me into the floorboards, a weight unseen. Anxiety settled like a fog, heavy, silent, and I realized the steps above had never stopped. The cabin was still, not quiet, exactly, but suspended, like the air itself had paused. Clocks ticked, or they seemed to, backwards, their hands creeping counter to reason, dragging time in reverse. Shadows moved on their own, stretching across the warped floorboards, curling up walls, then vanishing. They didn't follow light. They didn't obey me. I stepped forward. The boards creaked under my weight. Or perhaps they remembered my step from before. I could not tell. The air pressed in, thick with the scent of damp wood and ash. Static tingled across my skin. Every breath felt borrowed, fragile. A candle flickered. Its flame moved contrary to the draft, swaying in defiance. Shadows behind it pulsed, independent, restless. I touched the table. Cold, sticky. The journal from earlier lay there, its pages blank, then filled again with shapes I couldn't read. Time had folded in the cabin. Movements repeated, distorted. Sounds echoed before they existed. My pulse throbbed in reverse, yet forward, uncertain. The fog pressed against the windows, thick, white, unreal. Outside, the forest blurred, frozen in a frame that refused to end. A bird hovered mid-flight, suspended, its wings quivering, trapped in the air. I reached for the door. It resisted, the handle cold, wet, unyielding. The hallway beyond stretched unnaturally, shadows pooling at its edges. The clocks ticked again. Backwards. Tick. Backwards. Tick. I turned, and my own shadow lagged. It twisted slowly, following me imperfectly. Its movements betrayed me, copying me, then not. I could not predict it, could not control it. The air chilled further. My breath hung in clouds that refused to fade. Time itself pressed against my skin. Dense, static, immovable. The walls seemed to pulse. Faint vibration. Not the house. Not the boards. Something else alive in a fold of suspended moments. I froze. Fingers hovering over the table. The journal flickered. Pages curling, twisting. I could feel the weight of hours pressing down. The shadows leaned closer. Independent now, purposeful. I stepped back, but the cabin had swallowed space. Distance was meaningless. The clocks ticked again. Backwards. Tick, tick. I realized I had been here before, and I would be here again. Time had stopped, and I was trapped. The cabin felt heavier tonight. Dust clung to the air, thick and dry. Every breath carried the scent of old wood and ash. A hollowed section of wall caught my eye. The wood was warped, discolored, almost breathing. A faint draft whispered from the gap. I stepped closer. The floorboards groaned softly under my weight. The air shifted, brushing my skin with a chill that wasn't from the draft. The hollow revealed a hidden space. Inside, strange carvings glowed faintly, etched into the wood. Symbols that pulsed softly, like the beat of a distant heart. A soft voice murmured, inviting, gentle, almost imperceptible, but threaded through the air around me. Come closer. I hesitated. The glow reflected in my eyes. I could feel the vibration of something moving inside the hollow. My hand hovered over the edge. The wood was cold, damp, sticky in the corners. A faint metallic tang rose to my nose. The carvings pulsed in response to my gaze. Soft light stretched along the edges of the hollow. The shadows leaned closer, curious, curling at the corners of the room. I leaned in. The voice called again, whispering softly in my ear, though no one was there. The movement inside shifted, slow, deliberate, just beyond full view. The air hummed faintly, brushing my arms and neck. I could feel the pulse of the cabin through the floorboards. Time seemed to stretch, elongated, suspended. I traced the carvings with a fingertip. The glow flared subtly at my touch. Soft heat radiated from the hollow. Under the chill of the air, a shape moved inside. Slow, fluid, impossible to define. It pressed against the edges, curious, aware of me. I could hear static in the silence. A whisper threading through the hum of the walls. The hollow breathed, expanding subtly, inviting. I pressed my ear closer. The voice whispered again. Warm, near, impossible to locate. It made the hair on my arms stand on end. The glow pulsed once more. The shadows shifted in rhythm. I felt drawn in, compelled, curiosity overriding caution. I stepped closer, fingertip hovering over the hollow. The air was thick, alive, pressing against my chest. The hidden space seemed to watch, waiting. Movement flitted within, faint, deliberate, as if observing me. The carvings shimmered softly, echoing the pulse of something unseen. I breathed slowly. The cabin held its breath with me. The hollow whispered, alive, patient, and I could not look away. The hallway stretched long and narrow. Shadows pulled along the edges, curling like smoke. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of burned wood. Then it appeared, a tall figure, almost translucent, like mist-shaped into form. It drifted silently toward me. No sound accompanied its movement, yet the floorboards seemed to shiver beneath its presence. Its gaze found me, piercing, cold, impossible to ignore. I stepped back. The hallway stretched behind me, empty. No shadow followed. No shape lingered. The figure moved closer, slowly, deliberately, edges wavering like smoke in a draft. I could feel the air shift. A soft vibration brushed my skin. The temperature dropped subtly, chilling my chest and hands. Its eyes, though faint, almost nothing, held me. Not angry, not kind, just aware, unblinking, watching. I tried to breathe silently. The hallway seemed to bend, lengthen, distort. Every shadow leaned toward the figure. I stepped back again, and it was gone. Empty air. Just my own shallow breaths and the faint smell of damp wood. I dared to glance down the hall. Nothing. No footsteps. No hint it had ever been there. Only the lingering weight of its gaze pressing against my spine. The hallway held its silence. The shadows pulled and shifted. A faint static lingered in the air, as if the figure's presence had left a memory behind. I wanted to move forward. I wanted to leave, but the floorboard seemed to pulse softly under my feet. Echoes of something unseen, following, waiting. I breathed slowly. The cold brushed my shoulders again. A whisper of air, like the figure had passed near, just beyond perception. I couldn't look away. The hallway felt alive, bending, stretching in anticipation, and I knew it could return. I stayed, alone, listening, breath held, the emptiness pressing closer than ever. The cabin was quiet. Thick dust floated in the pale light. hanging in the air like frozen breath. The smell of damp would lingered, sharp and clinging. A soft melody began, delicate, out of nowhere. A music box, somewhere in the room, playing by itself. The tune was familiar, but wrong. Slowed, stretched, notes skipping, falling behind each other like shadows chasing their own echo. I moved closer. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my feet. The air hummed faintly, brushing against my skin. Shadows began to dance, slowly at first, then twisting, bending, moving in rhythm with a disjointed melody. I reached for the box, cold wood under my fingers. The carvings on it glimmered faintly in the muted light. A faint metallic tang rose in the air, mixed with the smell of old varnish and dust. A note fell from the box. It fluttered like a trapped bird. I caught it, trembling. My name, written carefully, impossibly clear. I stepped back. The shadows flickered, stretching toward me. The music slowed, then stopped for a heartbeat, then started again, distorted, relentless. The air felt thick, alive. Every breath carried a chill that crept into my chest. Static prickled across my arms, making the hairs stand on end. I watched the shadows bend toward the box. They twisted unnaturally, moving as if drawn by the music itself. The room seemed to pulse softly, in time with each note. The note trembled in my hands. The paper was cold, damp at the edges. My fingers tingled as I held it. I breathed slowly. The melody twisted again, warping further. Shadows whispered against the walls. The faint scent of old wood and something faintly metallic pressed into my nose. I wanted to step away, but curiosity held me still. The music box hummed. The shadows leaned closer. A single note rang out, pure and cutting. The shadows froze mid-dance, then flickered, twisting toward me again. I folded the note carefully, heart pounding. The music slowed once more. The shadows softened, lingering at the corners. The air was heavy, alive, waiting. I stepped back, alone, and the room seemed to breathe around me. The music box continued its impossible tune, and I could not stop listening. The room was still. Dust hung in the air, faintly illuminated by pale light from a window. The scent of old wood and dampness lingered, thick and clinging. The closet door moved, gently, a subtle shake, almost imperceptible at first, but enough to catch my attention. Warm breath escaped through the crack. Soft, damp, real. It brushed my face, sending a shiver down my spine. I stepped closer. The floorboards beneath my feet groaned softly. Every movement echoed in the still air. Something stirred inside the closet. Not a shape I could see, just a motion, slow, deliberate, pressing against the thin wood. The air felt heavier. Static pricked across my arms. The scent of old cloth and something faintly metallic rose from the darkness. I reached out, trembling. The door shook again. The warm breath met my hand, brushing fingers and wrist. It pulsed against my skin, alive. Silence followed. Thick, tense, unbearable. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and uneven. The closet shivered once more. Saw footsteps, or maybe not, shifted inside. I could feel something observing me, pressing close, just beyond reach. I tried to pull back, but the air seemed to hold me. The warmth of the breath lingered, wrapping around my chest. The shadows in the room deepened. They clung to corners, stretching toward the closet. I could feel their weight pressing against the edges of my vision. The door moved again. A soft, insistent vibration. Something wanted attention. Something was waiting. I stepped back. The warm breath followed, brushing my cheek. Every nerve on edge, alive, screaming in tension. Time stretched. The silence expanded, thick and suffocating. Every sound I made felt amplified, fragile, too loud. The closet door paused, quivering, then stopped, but the presence remained, unseen, near, and patient. I could not move, alone in the room, listening to my own shallow breaths. The warmth lingered, the air pulsed softly, and I could not escape the feeling of being watched. The cabin felt older tonight. Every breath stirred dust motes that floated like tiny ghosts. The air smelled of dry wood and faint smoke, lingering in the corners. The floor moved beneath me, not in sudden jolts, but subtle, bending shifts that pulled at my balance. Shadows stretched unnaturally, along the edges of walls, across warped floorboards. They flickered with a life of their own. I stepped carefully. Each footfall pressed against the wood, which seemed to sigh under weight. The vibration pulsed softly up my legs. Objects around the room shifted. A cup, once on the table, now closer to the edge. A chair leaned slightly, though I hadn't touched it. The cabin felt alive, not with warmth, but with awareness. A quiet, patient, observing presence. I ran my hand along the floor. Cold, smooth, warped in ways that made no sense. The boards pressed back ever so slightly, like the house was breathing. Shadows lengthened further. They swirled in corners, curling toward the center of the room. Light trembled, pale and fragile against the moving dark. The hum of the air felt heavier. Static prickled across my skin, rising along my arms. Every nerve on edge, alert but unseen. I stepped back, and the floor shifted again. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough. The room seemed to pulse with each breath I drew. A chair nudged softly. A book slid a fraction along the table. Movement slow, deliberate, and unseen. I could feel the cabin watching. Every shadow, every warped board, every flicker of light. It was alive, patient, and curious. I paused. The air held its breath. The floor settled for a heartbeat, then shifted again, as if amused by my hesitation. I breathed slowly. The smell of old would press on me. The vibrations hummed through the soles of my feet. The room waited, silent but awake, and I could not shake the feeling that any step I took would be watched, mirrored, anticipated. The cabin was dim, lit only by pale light slipping through the cracks. Dust floated lazily, catching faint glimmers and refracting them into quiet specks. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something sour, metallic, lingering. I approached the mirror. The glass was old, warped, edges fogged with age. My reflection looked wrong. It flickered, a twitch in the corner of the eye, a shadow out of step. The lines of my face blurred, stretching, collapsing, becoming someone else and no one at all. Shadows detached from reality. They swirled along the edges of the mirror, hovering above the floor, brushing the walls. I could feel them in my chest, pressing softly, a cold weight I could not touch. A whisper came, soft, breathy, almost teasing, from the glass. It sounded like my name, drawn slowly, deliberately. I reached out. The surface was cool, almost liquid under my fingertips. The reflection wavered, not mirroring me anymore, moving independently, shifting closer, leaning toward me. The room smelled of damp wood and old polish. I shivered, the hairs on my arms rising. Every breath seemed echoed back by the glass, distorted, wrong. I stepped back. The reflection mimicked nothing. It lingered, watching, stretching itself taller, thinner, darker. I could feel it studying me. The shadows moved with a mind of their own. Across the floor, across the walls, into corners the light could not reach. They reached toward the mirror, curling around it, pressing into the glass. My own image twisted. The eyes flickered, blinked too slowly. A smile that I did not make stretched across a face I did not recognize. The whisper came again, soft, urgent, almost a sigh, vibrating through the air in my bones. I held my breath. The mirror seemed to pulse with it, alive, patient, waiting. I wanted to look away. Every instinct screamed. But I could not. The reflection held me. The air in the cabin thickened. Cold pressed against my skin. Static prickled along my arms and neck. The mirror breathed. Time seemed to stretch. My own reflection shifted again, fading, returning, flickering between familiar and unknown. The shadows curled closer. The whisper lingered in my ear, soft and patient. I stepped back again. The floor felt solid beneath me, though the shadows suggested otherwise. The glass was still, yet alive. I could not leave the room, could not move my eyes from the reflection that was me, but not me. And the whisper, it lingered, faint, almost content. The cabin was quiet. Dust floated in the pale light, caught in streaks from the window. The air smelled faintly of old pine and dry wood. Behind the bookshelf, something shifted. A door revealed itself. I hadn't noticed it before. It opened into darkness, complete, the kind that swallows light and sound alike. A faint scratching came, soft, deliberate, rhythmic, and then a breath, slow, shallow, and possibly near. I stepped closer. The floorboards creaked under careful weight. The air pressed against my skin, cool and expectant. Shadows clung to the edges of the room. They seemed to hesitate at the doorway, curling toward the black. The silence was thick, layered, alive. The scratching continued. Closer now. A subtle vibration traveled through the floor into my soles. I could smell the faint musk of damp earth and something unidentifiable, metallic. I wanted to step back, but curiosity pulled. A gentle tug in my chest, whispering that I should see. The doorway breathed. A current of cold air brushed my cheek. It carried faint sounds I could not place. Soft but deliberate. I placed my hand on the doorframe. It was warmer than expected, smooth, almost pulsing under my touch. The darkness inside seemed to shift, as if aware of me. Every instinct screamed to retreat. Yet something deeper whispered to move forward. To see, to feel, to understand. The air smelled richer near the opening. A faint tang, like iron and whetstone. The shadows seemed to lean closer, pressing against the edges of the doorway. I inched forward. The scratching stopped. The breath held frozen in the air. The silence thickened, heavy and expectant. I could feel something waiting, alive, watching, patient, and I could not look away. The darkness seemed to reach. Curled fingers of black that licked the edges of the light. It invited me, coaxed me, pulled at the corners of my mind. I stepped closer still. The floor beneath me solid yet trembling slightly. The air wrapped around my arms, my face, my chest. A whisper came from inside, soft, almost intimate. My name, drawn slowly, pulling me deeper. I hesitated. Breath caught. The doorway waited, infinite and unknowable. And curiosity won. The night pressed close. Fog swirled violently outside the cabin, thick and hungry. It rolled over the trees, curling around trunks and branches like slow, living fingers. Shadows appeared in the haze, shapes that shifted and vanished, patterns too deliberate to be random. The air smelled damp, earthy, tinged with something metallic. A low hum resonated deep in my chest. Not outside, not inside, but within me. I could feel it vibrating in my bones, steady, patient, impossible to ignore. The forest seemed to lean closer. The trees bent, shadows stretching toward the cabin walls. Branches scraped softly against the windows, brushing like fingertips. I stepped closer to the glass. Fog clung to it, cold and wet against my palms. Shapes danced just beyond, half seen, impossibly thin, impossibly tall. Every movement I made, every breath, seemed mirrored outside. Shadows mimicked my stance, my hesitation, my fear. The hum grew louder, filling my ears, my lungs, my heart. The wind carried whispers, indistinct, urgent, curling around the edges of the fog. They reached my ears, my skin, crawling along my spine. I wanted to look away, to shut the window, to breathe normally, to escape. But the fog had me. It held me in place. A shape lingered just beyond the glass. Tall, shifting, leaning closer with a mist. Its edges blurred, impossibly still, and yet in motion. The forest felt alive. Every leaf, every branch, every distant sound pressing inward. I could feel it breathing, inhaling with the fog, exhaling into the cabin. My reflection stared back, pale, trembling, but nothing to compare to what waited outside. The hum, the shadows, the cold, everything pressed against me. The shapes twisted, forming patterns that made no sense, but felt deliberate. A hand seemed to reach from the fog, brushing the glass where mine met it. I stepped back. The floorboards creaked beneath tentative weight. The hum receded slightly, leaving ringing in my ears, a reminder that I was not alone. The fog moved again, filling every corner, every shadow, folding the forest over itself. The shapes vanished, only to reappear in impossible angles, watching. I could feel my chest tighten. The cold pressed against my ribs, breath caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my legs stayed still. The night stretched. The fog lingered, slow and deliberate. Outside, the forest watched, and I could not move. The night pressed close. The cabin walls sagged under shadows. A familiar creak echoed through the floorboards. Then a voice, soft, so familiar it tugged at memory, but wrong. Its tone stretched, too thin, too hollow. It called my name. Not loudly, never loudly. Just enough to prick the skin, to make the hairs along my arms shiver. Shadows moved, slowly, deliberately, curling along corners, stretching across warped floorboards. They weren't random. They followed the sound, reacting to the voice as if it commanded them. I could feel memories shift, sliding like fog through my mind. Faces I thought I'd forgotten flickered. Smiles distorted, eyes darker than they should be. The air smelled faintly of smoke and damp wood, and beneath it, something acrid, metallic, a hint of rust that made my chest tighten. I stepped forward, but the floor resisted, not with weight, not with strain, but with tension, as if it had a pulse of its own. Every movement echoed, exaggerated in the shadows. The voice came again, closer this time, soft, intimate, impossible place. It wasn't outside, it wasn't inside, it was everywhere. I reached toward it. My fingers brushed nothing but cold air. Still, the shadows twitched. The floorboards groaned beneath imagined weight. The light flickered. Pale beams stretched through the room, catching glimpses of shapes that weren't there a moment ago. A hand here, a face there, gone before I could focus. Memories twisted further. I remembered things I hadn't lived. Moments replayed in the wrong order. Voices calling from corners of my mind I'd never known. The air grew heavier. Breath stuck in my throat. The voice murmured again, just beneath hearing, almost intimate. I wanted to look away, to shut my eyes and wait for morning. But something rooted me to the spot, a mix of fear and curiosity, a thread I could not sever. Shadows shifted again. They leaned, reaching, curling, dancing to the tone of the voice I knew. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with it. A memory flared. A room I thought forgotten, sunlight over a desk, a laugh that should have felt warm. But here, it was wrong, twisted, hollow, echoing in corners that didn't exist. The voice whispered once more, tender, familiar, but beneath it, a threat, subtle, patient, threading into every shadow, every breath. I could feel unease settling deep, sinking into the floor, rising along the walls. It seeped into my chest, a slow, cold pressure that made my heartbeat thud painfully. I did not move. I did not run. I only listened. As shadows bent closer, as a voice curled around memory, pulling, twisting, leaving a residue of doubt. The room held me. The voice held me. And I could not place what was real. The cabin felt hollow. Night pressed against the windows, heavy and cold. A soft, rustling moved through the corners, like breath brushing the walls. Then a door slammed. Not softly, not with hesitation. It screamed in the silence, a crack of sound that stretched too long, too sharp. Dust rose from the floor. Fog twisted around the boards. It filled the room with a damp, choking weight. Shadows gathered, slowly, deliberately, along the edges of the walls. They leaned toward the sound, stretching, curling, pulling closer. I stepped back, but the floor resisted. The air itself pressed against my chest. Cold, thick, alive. The door remained still now, but its scream lingered, bouncing against walls, embedding itself in the air like it refused to fade. I could hear whispers beneath the hum of the room, soft, low, almost inaudible, but insistent, curling around my ears, following each exhale. The shadows trembled. They moved like water across warped floorboards. They touched corners where light had no business reaching. And the dust continued to swirl, slowly, rhythmically, as if in a pulse. I reached toward the door. My hand trembled. It felt impossibly heavy, like the air itself clung to my skin, cold and damp. A faint vibration traveled through the floor. The boards groaned. Each creak echoed unnaturally. The room felt alive, aware, watching. I didn't move. I couldn't. The shadows gathered nearer. The fog thickened, tasting faintly of iron, rust on wood, something older than memory. The door shuddered again. A soft, almost breathing sound came from it. I pressed my ear closer. The air hummed in resonance. Something brushed past behind me. Warm, soft, immediate. I spun, but the room was empty. The shadows shifted, folding over themselves. They pulled toward the door, dark liquid shapes without edges, without beginning. The hum grew louder. Or perhaps my chest had caught it, resonating with the force behind the wood. My fingers itched with tension. Every nerve felt stretched, taut, pulling me toward the door and away from it at once. The fog rose higher. Dust whirled in invisible spirals. The air tasted metallic. Every breath felt thick, clinging to my tongue, my throat. Then silence. A pause so absolute it made my ears ache. And in that silence, the memory of the slam lingered, sharp, jagged, insistent. I stepped back. The shadows receded slightly. But the weight remained. The hum remained. The door remained, watching. I wanted to leave, to run. But the room held me. Every corner, every breath, every cold touch of the air that was not air at all. And still, the door waited, silent now. But its scream had not left. It whispered through the walls, through the fog, through the shadows. I did not move. I could not move. I only felt. And the cabin waited with me. The hallway stretched before me, long and narrow, pale light spilling from unseen cracks. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and cold stone. I took a step. The floor creaked underfoot, soft, deliberate, as if warning me to stop. Ahead, the same door, painted pale, worn at the edges. I blinked, and it was still there. I turned left. The hallway curved. Shadows gathered along the walls, leaning closer. And there it was again, the same door. My chest tightened. Every breath felt thick, wet with fog that hadn't been there before. The walls seemed to stretch, pulling the air thin, bending light into strange angles. I tried another turn, right this time. The shadows shifted. They watched, and the door waited at the end, unchanged. I whispered to myself. The words sounded hollow, echoing in the silence. My own voice seemed distant, unrecognizable. The hallway stretched farther than it should. Each step carried the same creak. I smelled dust and something faintly metallic, like iron left out in the rain. A shadow moved slightly ahead. Or perhaps it had always been there. I couldn't tell. It didn't walk. It simply waited, watching, folding into the corners. The door, it almost seemed to pulse, breathing with the hallway. Its edges warped subtly, like it existed outside of time. I spun around. The hallway repeated itself, bending impossibly. Shadows mirrored me now. They didn't step, they copied. Every gesture, every pause. I pressed my hands to my ears. The silence felt too loud. The hum of the walls, the floor vibrating underfoot, the whisper of air, all converged into a single pulse against my skin. I wanted to run, but every direction led back to the same door, and the shadows followed, folding around my ankles, brushing cold, intangible fingers against my legs. The hallway seemed to stretch forever. Each turn, each step, the same door, the same pale wood and chipped edges. I crouched against the wall. The air was thick, almost viscous. Every breath I drew felt borrowed, like I was inhaling someone else's fear. The shadows leaned closer. They didn't move like shadows. They moved like thought, like intention. And the door, it waited silently, calmly, as if it had always been expecting me. I reached for the handle. My fingers trembled. It was cold, not metal, not wood. Cold like a wound left open to the night. I pulled back, step after step. The hallway repeated itself. The shadows multiplied, filling the space around me, wrapping the pale light in darkness. I tried to run. The floor stretched beneath me. Each movement felt slower, heavier. And yet, each turn, each frantic glance, brought me back to the same door. The hallway had no end, no beginning, only the door, and the shadows, and the soft, cold hum that filled the space between. I stopped, my breath left in short, shaky wisps. The shadows leaned closer. The door waited. I realized I would never leave this hallway. The door had always been here, and so had I. I could only watch and wait as the shadows closed in. The fog pressed close against the cabin. Cold, damp, almost alive. It rolled across the ground, curling around the trees. I stepped closer to the window. The glass was chilled to the touch, and my breath left tiny clouds that lingered too long. Something moved, or perhaps the fog itself shifted, but it had form, a shape faceless, tall, bending slightly, but human almost. It hovered just beyond the clearing, and yet it seemed to watch me, to sense me. I wanted to look away, but my eyes held firm, trapped in the pale, rolling mist. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and something metallic, like rusted iron left to rot. The fog twisted around the trees, turning familiar branches into reaching hands. The shape shifted again. It flowed like smoke, but heavier, more deliberate. Every movement whispered intent, as if it understood me. I pressed my palm to the glass. Coldness bit through my skin, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. The world outside the window distorted. Shapes I thought were trees leaned closer. The ground seemed to rise and fall beneath the fog. I shivered, and the cold seemed to crawl under my skin. It moved closer. Or maybe I moved closer my own fear. The boundary blurred. The fog wrapped around it, and yet it remained distinct, faceless, watching. A soft rustle of leaves reached my ears. But it wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, pausing, lingering, like a breath drawn just for me. My chest tightened. The shape seemed to pulse, not with light, but with awareness. Almost sentient, almost human. I wanted to step back, to hide, to vanish. But my legs were frozen. The fog thickened. Each step I imagined taking felt slowed, weighed down. The shape shifted again, leaning slightly forward, as though curious. I could feel the hum of the air, a subtle vibration through the floorboards, through the walls, through my own bones. Time slowed. The fog, the shape, the forest itself, all suspended me in a moment that refused to move. I tried to blink. The shape stayed, watching, waiting, and I realized I couldn't make it leave. It lingered at the edge of perception, bending the fog into impossible angles. The mist swirled around it, turning something almost solid into a shifting shadow. I pressed my face to the cold glass. The chill burned against my cheeks. My breath fogged the pain. But the shape did not blink, did not shift too fast. It simply was. I wanted to scream, to shatter the quiet, but my voice had vanished somewhere between fear and disbelief. The fog and the shape moved together, a rhythm I could not name. The forest leaned closer, and the air smelled wetter, heavier, laden with something old and waiting. I realized then that no matter what I did, I could not escape its gaze. It was not just outside the cabin. It was in the cold, in the mist, in the shadows cast against the walls. It had always been watching. I took a step back. But even the floor seemed farther away. The room stretched longer than it should. The fog shifted once more, and the shape remained. I froze, because in that faceless presence, in the sentient pause, I understood the truth. I was not alone, and fear had already claimed me. The cabin waits, silent, still. Fog drifts across the clearing, curling around the trees, swallowing the path ahead. I stand at the edge of the woods. Breath clouds in the cold night air, and the ground beneath my feet is damp, soft with fallen leaves. Shadows flicker across the cabin walls. Or maybe they are not shadows. They twist and bend as if aware of me, watching my hesitation. I take a step closer. The wooden boards groan beneath the weight of unseen time, and the wind carries a whisper through the branches. The door hangs slightly open. Or is it closed? I can't tell anymore. The fog hides the edges, blurs the lines between inside and out. A chill crawls up my spine. The cabin seems to breathe. Slow, heavy, as though it knows the choice I must make. I glance behind me. The path is gone, swallowed by the gray haze. A low hum vibrates through the soles of my shoes, through the bones in my chest. Shadows flicker again, sharper this time. They lean toward the door, or perhaps toward me. It is impossible to tell. The air smells faintly of wet wood, and something else, something older. Iron? Smoke? It doesn't matter. The scent clings, and I cannot shake it. I step closer to the threshold. The fog curls higher, licking at my ankles, coiling around the fallen branches like fingers. The cabin seems to sigh. Or is it my own heart? Every breath I take feels loud, and every footstep echoes too long in the silent night. I reach out. The door is solid, cold under my fingertips. The wood hums faintly beneath the touch. A shiver runs through me, and I realize the shadows do not blink. Time stretches. I am neither inside nor outside, neither moving forward nor back. Frozen in the pause, held by the fog, by the lingering presence of the cabin. I hear a rustle in the corner of my vision, a shadow twist, almost bowing, almost beckoning. But the edges dissolve into mist before I can see its form. I step back. The fog swallows the ground. The path is gone again. And yet, the cabin waits, patient, silent, its walls breathing in tandem with mine. I imagine turning away, leaving the clearing behind. But the fog clings like cold silk, pressing at my legs, nudging me closer to the threshold. The wind shifts. A whisper curls around my ear, so faint I cannot place the words. It could be my own thoughts or something older, watching, waiting. I stand in the gray light, between leaving and staying, and the choice hangs heavy, almost alive. The shadows flicker one last time. I think I see them nod or lean forward in warning. It is impossible to tell which. The cabin exhales. The fog curls higher and the night deepens. I take a single step and nothing moves. The air tastes faintly of cold earth, and silence dominates everything. I realize then whether I step inside or away. The isolation remains. It is in the fog in the cabin, in the shadows that never blink. I stand still, and the choice lingers, indecisive, heavy, and the world narrows to this one breathless moment. I hear nothing but the hum of the night, the soft rustle of leaves in the fog, and the distant, silent watch of shadows. And I wait,